Hello everyone, and thank you for choosing to spend your evening here with me. If you enjoy these stories, I'd truly appreciate your subscription, like, and comment. It only takes a second for you, but it means the world to me and helps make each video even better. Now, get comfortable and let's begin. The alarm rings at 6 AM. You trudge to the kitchen, grab your phone, check Instagram, brew some coffee. The same routine every day, just an attempt to survive in the modern world. Now imagine this, 40,000 years ago. No alarm, no phone, no coffee. But here is what will blow your mind. Our ancient ancestors lived better than us in aspects that we are only beginning to understand. So, if these stories help you relax or something like that, give a like or subscribe. Also, it's interesting to know who is from where. Write your city and time in the comments. Everything you think you know about cavemen is wrong. These club-dragging, grunting, primitive people from cartoons are a complete fabrication. The real story is much more incredible, and, honestly, it will make you question everything about how we live today. Meet your great-grandfather, multiplied by about 2,000. He is standing outside what you would call his home. But it isn't a dark, damp cave. In fact, it is a complex shelter that he built out of mammoth bones covered with carefully processed hides, featuring several rooms and a central hearth that never goes out. The fire here isn't just for warmth, it is the heart of his technology. This guy is about to start his day, and his routine is about to shatter every stereotype you've ever heard. The first thing he does when the sun touches his face, he doesn't grunt or scratch himself. He checks the wind direction, feels the air pressure, studies the animal tracks left during the night. This guy reads the environment just like you read a weather forecast app, only he handles it better. You see, here is what nobody tells you about prehistoric people. To survive, they had to be geniuses. Think about it. No Google, no lessons on YouTube, no instructions. Everything they knew, they figured out themselves or learned from others who had figured it out. And they faced problems that would absolutely annihilate us. Imagine waking up knowing that today you might encounter a cave bear, or a pack of wolves. Or you might have to track a mammoth across the frozen tundra for 3 days, having only the tools with you that you made yourself from stones. But here is where the most incredible part begins. Recent discoveries prove that these people weren't just surviving. They were thriving, creating art, composing music, developing complex social structures, and doing things that we still scratch our heads over. How did they manage it? Let me tell you about the day when archaeologists found something that changed everything. It was the year 2008. A team was conducting excavations in Geinkelstuhl Cave in Germany. An ordinary day of sifting through 40,000-year-old dirt. And then they found it. A small fragment of carved mammoth bone about the size of a finger. At first, no one understood what it was. But when it was put together, it turned out to be a flute, a musical instrument perfectly crafted with finger holes positioned precisely to create real melodies. Realize this, 40,000 years ago, someone sat down and created music. Not just noise, not just the banging of stones against each other. They designed an instrument on which complex pieces could be played. This was a cave Mozart. But wait, there's more. When researchers tested these flutes, they discovered something incredible. The distance between the holes corresponded to the mathematical ratios that we use in modern musical instruments. These were not random holes. Someone understood acoustics, sound waves, harmony. This completely destroyed the idea that our ancestors were primitive. You cannot create complex musical instruments without advanced knowledge of physics, mathematics, and engineering. These people were scientists, and that is only the beginning. Remember how we constantly complain about lack of sleep, about insomnia, about eternal fatigue? Well, scientists studied modern hunter-gatherer tribes to understand how cavemen slept. What they discovered is striking. Cavemen slept better than us. Much better. They went to bed about 3 hours after sunset, and not when they were exhausted, when their bodies naturally wanted to sleep. They woke up about an hour before sunrise. Again, naturally, without any alarms. Here is the crazy part. In the modern tribes they studied, researchers discovered that all 94 people rarely woke up during the night, and in their language, there is literally no word to denote insomnia. Not one, because for them, it doesn't exist. Meanwhile, 48% of Americans regularly report insomnia. These cavemen understood something that we have completely lost. They also discovered that temperature, rather than light, controlled the sleep cycle. When they are cooled after sunset, their bodies naturally prepared for sleep. When it warmed up before dawn, they naturally woke up. Their sleeping places were not heated caves. They slept outside or in simple shelters, remaining connected to natural temperature cycles. We live in climate-controlled boxes and wonder why we can't fall asleep. But let's talk about what they actually did all day, because this is where the stereotypes finally collapse. Firstly, most cavemen did not live in caves. I know, mind blown. Caves were used sometimes, usually as temporary shelter or for special purposes. But these people were nomads. They built complex temporary structures that they could assemble and transport. Think about that level of engineering. You need to create a home that will be warm, weather-resistant, protected, and portable, without having a hardware store or videos on YouTube, using only your brain and whatever materials you can find. They built dome-shaped huts using flexible wooden frames covered with animal hides. Some used mammoth bones as structural supports. These were not crude lintos. Archaeological evidence shows that in these dwellings there were different zones. 4 different types of activities. Sleeping zones, work zones, places for food storage, and even waste disposal systems. Inside, they organized their space just as we organize our homes. Tools in one zone, food preparation in another. Sleeping places positioned to receive maximum warmth from the central fire. In some shelters, they even had stone floors, carefully laid out for drainage. But here is what really amazes me. They were artists. And not just the famous cave paintings that everyone knows about. We are talking about complex artistic traditions that lasted thousands of years. They carved intricate figurines, created jewelry from shells and animal teeth, made decorative objects that had no practical purpose other than beauty. The Venus of Willendorf, carved 30,000 years ago, demonstrates incredible artistic skill, detailed proportions, and a deep understanding of human anatomy. This was not someone who randomly chipped a stone. This was a trained artist. They also made paint, and not just any paint. They had paint factories, actual production sites where they ground ochre, mixed binding agents, and created different colors: red, yellow, black, white. They understood chemistry well enough to create lasting pigments that remain bright 40,000 years later. And they didn't just paint on cave walls. They painted their bodies, their tools, their dwellings. Art was not separated from daily life. It was integrated into everything they did. Now let's talk about their workday, because modern people would probably quit immediately. These people made absolutely everything themselves. Tools, clothing, shelter, food, medicine, everything from scratch, every single day. But here is what shocked researchers. They were incredibly efficient. Studies of modern hunter-gatherers show that people leading a traditional lifestyle spend only 4 to 6 hours a day on survival tasks. The rest of the time is social interaction, storytelling, games, creativity, rest. We work 810 hours a day and still try our hardest to cover basic needs, such as food and housing. They worked half as much and thrived. Why? Because they were masters of their environment. They knew exactly which plants could be eaten and when, which animals to hunt and how, where to find water, how to predict the weather, where to take cover during a storm. They carried this knowledge in their heads. Millennia of accumulated wisdom passed down from generation to generation. No books, no internet, only human memory and direct teaching. One caveman knew more about survival than most modern people will learn in a lifetime. They could identify hundreds of edible plants, track dozens of different animals, predict weather conditions, navigate by the stars, build a fire in any conditions, craft tools from raw materials, treat injuries and diseases with herbal medicines. They were walking encyclopedias, but they didn't do all this alone. Here is another myth that must die. Cavemen were not isolated family groups struggling against nature. They lived in complex social networks spanning vast distances. Archaeologists have found seashells hundreds of miles from the ocean, obsidian tools thousands of miles from the extraction sites, amber jewelry in regions far from their places of natural origin. This means trade networks, communication between groups, regular contact across vast spaces. They were more connected to each other than many modern people. These networks served not only for the exchange of materials, they shared knowledge, tool-making techniques, information about animal migration, weather conditions, food sources. Innovation spread through these networks faster than you might think. When someone in the territory of modern France came up with a better way to make spearheads, this knowledge reached Germany within decades, not through phones or the internet, but through human networks maintained by regular contact and migration. They also cared for each other in a way that would put modern communities to shame. Archaeological finds demonstrate people with disabilities who lived full lives, thanks to the support of their groups' fused bones after serious injuries that required months of care. Elderly people who lived long after they ceased to be productive. These were not societies that abandoned the weak. These were communities that valued everyone, and they raised children in this environment. Children learned by observing, participating, and playing, rather than sitting in classrooms for 12 years trying to memorize information they never use. Cavemen's children mastered practical skills that directly related to their survival and prosperity. By age 10, they knew how to build a fire, identify edible plants, track animals, and create simple tools. By age 15, they were full members of society with skills that took decades to master. Modern children graduate from high school and still don't know how to balance a checkbook. But here is what really strikes me about these people. They were innovators, constantly improving and developing new technologies. Archaeological records show continuous innovation over thousands of years. Tools become more complex, techniques more refined, art more multifaceted. They were not stuck in a primitive state. They were constantly evolving and moving forward. They invented the spear thrower, which increased hunting range by 300%. They developed the pressure flaking technique, creating tools so sharp they rival modern surgical instruments. They figured out how to store food for months using natural preservation methods. They even had specialized tools for specialized tasks. Different arrowheads for different types of game. Scrapers designed specifically for processing hides. Engraving tools for creating detailed works of art. Needles for sewing clothes. And fishhooks for catching specific types of fish. This level of specialization indicates advanced planning and a deep understanding of tool design. You don't develop 20 different types of scrapers if you don't truly understand materials science. And we haven't even talked about the most mind-blowing discovery yet. In 2022, researchers announced something that changed everything we thought about caveman intelligence. They studied the brain activity of modern people learning to make ancient stone tools. What they found was shocking. Making Paleolithic tools activates the same neural networks in the brain used by modern pianists. The same pathways, the same complex motor planning, the same working memory systems. In other words, learning to make stone tools 2 million years ago was as cognitively complex as learning to play the classical piano today. These were not primitive people banging rock against rock. These were highly skilled craftsmen performing complex cognitive tasks that required years of training to master. Think about what that means. Every adult in a caveman community possessed the coordination and cognitive abilities of a musician level just to create their basic survival tools. We are talking about societies where everyone was, in essence, a highly skilled specialist, where the baseline level of skills and knowledge required for daily life exceeded what most modern people develop over their entire careers. But here is what really hits home for me. We have lost most of these abilities. We cannot start a fire without matches. We cannot find food without grocery stores. We cannot navigate without GPS. We cannot predict the weather without apps. We have gained incredible technological power, but we have lost the fundamental skills that sustained human life for 300,000 years. Therefore, when you think of the average caveman, do not imagine a grunting primitive. Imagine a highly intelligent, skillful, creative, and socially active individual who could handle challenges that would crush most modern people. Imagine a person who could look at a piece of rock and see a complex tool within it, who could study animal tracks and know exactly where dinner was hiding, who could read the sky and predict tomorrow's weather more accurately than your weather app. Imagine a person who created art for joy, music for community spirit, and innovations that improved the lives of entire generations. And then ask yourself, if they could do all this with only their brains, their hands, and the world around them, what does that say about human potential? What does it say about what we might be capable of if we truly tried? Because the most shocking truth about cavemen is not how primitive they were. It is how incredibly advanced they were, and how much we still have to learn from them. The answer to this question takes us back to 0.6 million years, to a moment that changed everything. Imagine the African savanna. Hot, dry, dangerous. Early hominids are struggling to survive. They are not quite humans yet, but no longer apes. They are something in between, and they are about to make a discovery that leads straight to those skilled cave artists we just talked about. Someone picks up a stone, not to throw it, and not to use it as a hammer. He looks at it and sees something entirely different. He sees a tool that doesn't exist yet, but could be. He strikes this stone with another stone deliberately, precisely, and creates the first human technology. This moment is so important that archaeologists have a name for it: the Oldowan Revolution. And this is where the story of human intelligence truly begins. But here is what nobody tells you about those first stone tools. They were not a crude accident. Recent analysis shows that even the earliest toolmakers understood physics, geometry, and material science. To make a useful stone tool, you need to understand how force propagates through the rock. You need to accurately predict where the flakes will occur. You need to know which types of stone are suitable for the job and which are not. This requires the motor coordination of a surgeon. This is not simple mimicry. It is complex problem solving requiring the abstract thinking we associate with modern humans. And as soon as they figured it out, everything changed. Tools meant they could process food more efficiently, cut meat, crack bones for marrow, and access nutrients that were previously impossible to obtain. Improved nutrition led to larger brains. Larger brains led to the creation of better tools. It was an evolutionary feedback loop that continued for millions of years, but the real turning point came about 1.8 million years ago. That was when ancient humans discovered fire. Not just used it, anyone can pick up a burning branch from a tree struck by lightning, but specifically the control of fire, making fire, and keeping it alive. This discovery was so revolutionary that some scientists believe it was what made us human. Fire changed everything in the lives of ancient humans. Suddenly, they could cook food. Cooked food is easier to digest, provides more calories, and unlocks nutrients unavailable in raw form. This dietary leap fueled rapid brain growth. But fire did more than just improve the diet. It extended their day. Before fire, human activity was limited by daylight. After the appearance of fire, they could work, socialize, and create late into the night. Fire also provided protection. Predators that would happily attack sleeping humans thought twice before approaching a group gathered around a blazing fire. This safety allowed people to sleep more soundly and longer, which is critical for brain development and memory consolidation. And fire allowed people to settle new territories. Suddenly, they could survive in colder climates. The frozen tundra of Europe became habitable. Mountain regions opened up. Nights in the deserts became bearable. Fire became the technology that transformed humans from a regional African species into a global phenomenon. But here is what captures the imagination. The earliest evidence of controlled fire use dates back to million years. This means that ancient humans were masters of fire maintenance for 1.96 million years before agriculture was invented. Realize this. Fire technology was so important that humans perfected it and relied on it for nearly 2 million years. This is 40 times longer than all recorded human history. And they didn't just start fires, they became fire experts. Archaeological finds show that ancient humans used different types of fire for different purposes. Fast, hot fires for cooking meat. Slow, steady fires for warmth. Smoky ones for food preservation. Underground fires for heating stones used in earth ovens. They knew which would burn the hottest, which produced the least smoke, and which was best suited for making charcoal. They understood fire, just as modern people understand electricity. This expertise was passed down through generations. Maintaining the fire became one of the most important skills in human society, and losing the fire could result in death. Some groups maintained an eternal fire that burned continuously for months or even years. Transporting this fire from camp to camp required special tools and techniques. Others developed methods for starting fire quickly, using friction, sparks, or other means. But while all this was happening, something even more important was developing: language. No one knows exactly when humans started speaking. Language doesn't leave fossils, but we can make informed guesses based on other data. The ability to create complex tools requires the ability to teach complex skills, and teaching complex skills requires advanced communication. You cannot pass on knowledge of the pressure flaking technique or fire making using only grunts and gestures. Archaeological data suggests that by 800,000 years ago, ancient humans were planning complex coordinated actions, group hunts that required precise timing, tool making involving many sequential steps, long distance migrations requiring navigation and planning. All of this points to advanced communication. Perhaps it wasn't the level of Shakespeare, but it was certainly a complex language, capable of expressing abstract ideas, future plans, and detailed instructions. And as soon as humans learned to communicate effectively with each other, innovation accelerated exponentially. Instead of every individual figuring out everything from scratch, knowledge could be shared, techniques could be taught, and improvements could be communicated to other groups and generations. Thus, the first information networks in human history emerged. Think about what that means. An improved hunting technique developed in what is now Kenya could spread to groups in Tanzania. In a few years, a new tool-making method, discovered in Morocco, could reach Spain in decades. Humans became the first species to create a culture that improved faster than genetics. Instead of waiting millions of years for evolutionary adaptations, they could develop behavioral adaptations in a single generation and pass them on immediately. It was at this moment that man ceased to be just another animal species and became something completely new. But language did more than just improve the transmission of technology. It opened the possibility for abstract thinking, storytelling, and shared beliefs. Suddenly, people were able to talk about things that were not physically present. They could discuss the past and plan for the future. They could share ideas about meaning, purpose, and the nature of existence. This cognitive revolution eventually led to art, music, religion, and complex social structures. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's return to those first toolmakers and trace how their simple stone tools evolved into the complex technologies we discussed earlier. The progress is truly amazing when you realize what was actually happening. Those first old iron tools, 2.6 million years old, were simple but effective. Choppers, scrapers, and sharp flakes created by striking stone against stone. Basic, but functional. But by 1.76 million years ago, ancient humans were already making hand axes. These were not just better tools, they were tools that required a completely different way of thinking. Hand axes are symmetrical. They have an intentional shape. They are created according to an abstract mental template that exists only in the mind of the master. This is huge. It means that ancient humans could conceive of something that did not yet exist and then create it. They could hold an abstract ideal in their mind and systematically work toward achieving it. Hand axes also required long-term planning. Unlike simple choppers, which could be made in a couple of minutes, hand axes required hours of careful work. The master had to envision the final product and systematically deliver dozens of precise strikes to achieve it. And here is what is truly striking. Hand axes of that period are often much more complex and refined than their practical function required. Many of them bear traces of having been created for aesthetic reasons, as much as for utilitarian ones. Some archaeologists believe that hand axes were man's first attempt to create beauty, for beauty's sake. But tools continued to grow more complex. By 400,000 years ago, ancient humans had developed the lever war technique. It involved the preliminary preparation of stone cores nuclei, so that, if necessary, an ideal tool could be quickly flaked off. This is like pre-production. They spent hours carefully shaping the stone core, and then, when they needed a tool, they could obtain an ideal blade in seconds. This requires incredible spatial thinking and forward planning. The master must foresee the entire sequence of strikes, understand how each of them will affect the final result, and move backward from the desired goal. Modern researchers have tried to learn these techniques. To master them requires years of training, and even with a modern understanding of physics and engineering, many people cannot do it. Nevertheless, every adult in Paleolithic communities possessed these skills. By 50,000 years ago, tool technologies exploded with dozens of specialized devices: spearheads, scrapers, burins, needles, fishhooks, harpoons, each designed for specific tasks and executed with incredible precision. The technological complexity of late Paleolithic tools in many ways rivals modern manufacturing. Some stone blades are sharper than modern surgical instruments. Some spearheads are aerodynamically perfect. This was not primitive technology. This was advanced engineering using Stone Age materials. But tools were only part of the story. People were also developing increasingly complex social structures. Early human groups were small, perhaps 20-30 people living and traveling together. But as tools and techniques improved, group sizes grew. Larger groups meant the possibility of greater specialization. Some people could focus on making tools, while others specialized in hunting or gathering plants. This division of labor led to the creation of even better tools and more efficient food production. But large groups also created new challenges. How to coordinate the activities of 100 people. How to resolve conflicts. How to make group decisions. Humans developed social technologies to solve these problems. Leadership structures, conflict resolution methods, systems for distributing resources and information. They also developed rituals and traditions that helped maintain group cohesion, shared stories that strengthened group identity, ceremonies that marked important transitions, and art and music that united everyone. These were not just entertainment. These were social technologies as vital to the group's survival as stone tools. And people used these technologies to spread across the entire planet. The history of migration is absolutely incredible if you truly think about it. Starting from Africa, ancient humans traveled on foot to every continent except Antarctica. They crossed deserts, mountains, frozen tundra, and, eventually, even oceans. They adapted to climates ranging from tropical forests to Arctic ice sheets. Each new environment required new adaptations, new tools, new hunting techniques, new housing designs, and new food sources. People who migrated to cold climates developed specialized cold weather clothing, heating techniques, and food preservation technologies. Those who moved to coastal areas became expert fishers and boat builders. Mountain dwellers developed survival skills for high altitudes. But here is what is amazing. They maintained contact with each other across these vast distances. Archaeological finds show that innovations continued to spread between groups, separated by enormous distances. A new spearhead design developed in Africa would appear in Europe within a few thousand years. artistic styles, and techniques cross continents. This means that people maintain social and trade links spanning thousands of miles, without any technology other than their own feet. They were creating the first global civilization. By 40,000 years ago, people had spread from the southern tip of Africa to the Arctic Circle, from the Atlantic coasts to the Pacific Islands. They adapted to every climate on Earth and created hundreds of different local cultures, but they all shared certain common elements: tool-making technologies, fire management, language, art, music, and social cooperation. These were human universals that arose from our shared evolutionary heritage. And in every place, they solved the same basic survival tasks with incredible creativity and intelligence. How to find food in the desert, how to keep warm during the Ice Age, how to cross a river, how to store food for the winter, how to treat diseases and injuries. Ancient humans found solutions to all these problems. Solutions that worked so well that some of them are still used by traditional societies today. They developed dozens of different ways to make fire, hundreds of food processing techniques, thousands of plant-based medicines, and methods of navigating by the stars, landmarks, and natural phenomena. They created technologies for every aspect of human life, and they did it without schools, books, or formal education systems. Every person learned by observing, practicing, and receiving direct instruction from experts. Knowledge was stored in human memory and passed down through generations of hands-on learning. This created societies where every adult was a master of many complex skills, and the baseline level of competence was extraordinarily high. But the most incredible thing about this evolutionary journey is where it led. Those first toolmakers, who first struck stone against stone, 2.6 million years ago, set off a chain of events that eventually led to the appearance of those skilled cave artists, musicians, and innovators we talked about at the beginning. The journey from simple stone choppers to mammoth tusk flutes took millions of years, but it was a direct path. Each innovation built on previous discoveries. Each generation improved on what had been done before it, and by 40,000 years ago, humans became something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. They became a species that could adapt to any environment, not through genetic evolution, but through cultural innovation. They could solve new problems in a single generation and immediately pass on those solutions. They became the ultimate survivors not because they were the strongest or fastest, or best adapted to any particular environment, but because they could find a way out of any trial using their minds, and that was only the beginning. For while all this technological and social development was taking place, something else was being born, something that would define human civilization for the next 40,000 years. An explosion of symbolic thinking that we call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. This is the moment when people stopped just creating tools and started creating meanings. When they began to create art, music, jewelry, and ritual objects. When they began to bury their dead with grave goods. When they began to decorate their bodies and the environment. When they became fully modern humans in every sense that we recognize today. But this revolution did not happen overnight. It was the culmination of millions of years of evolution, innovation, and cultural development. And understanding how this happened helps explain why those cave artists and flute makers were so incredibly advanced. These were not primitive people who stumbled upon art and music by accident. They were the heirs to millions of years of human innovation, the last link in a continuous chain of technological and cultural development, stretching back to the very first toolmaker. They had better brains, better tools, better social systems, and better knowledge than any people before them. They were the pinnacle of Paleolithic achievement, the most successful survivors in human history, and they used all this accumulated wisdom to create a way of life that modern science is only now beginning to understand and appreciate. So what did a typical day actually look like for one of these people, standing at the peak of evolution? Let's follow Krog for 24 hours. Yes, I will call him Krog. It probably isn't his real name, but we will never know what he actually called himself. But we know everything else about his life, and it will blow your mind. It is now approximately 35,000 years ago. We are located where the south of France will one day be. Krog is 28 years old, which by the standards of that time makes him a middle-aged man. He has a wife, 2 children, and more responsibility than any modern CEO. The sun hasn't risen yet, but Krog is already awake, not because of insomnia and not because of stress about work. His body simply woke up naturally when the temperature began to rise. His circadian rhythm is perfectly synchronized with the natural world. He lies on a bed that will surprise you. It's not just a pile of animal skins thrown on the ground. It is a carefully constructed sleeping surface made of layers of grass covered with processed hides, with natural padding made of pine needles and feathers. In fact, it's more comfortable than many types of modern camping gear. But here is what's truly interesting. He doesn't sleep alone. The whole family sleeps together in one area of their dwelling. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents. And it's not because they lack space. It is a conscious choice. Modern sleep researchers have discovered that people who sleep in the same room as family members have better quality sleep, feel safer, and have stronger social bonds. Cavemen understood this 35,000 years ago. Krog gets up quietly, trying not to wake anyone. The first thing he does is check the fire, not because it went out, but because maintaining the fire is literally a matter of life and death. This is not the campfire you see in the movies. It is not a blazing flame. It is a carefully managed, complex heating system. In fact, it consists of several hearths, each designed for its own purpose. There is a main fire in the center of the dwelling for warmth and general cooking. There is a smaller, hotter fire for specialized work, such as heating stones or making tools. A smoky fire near the entrance is for repelling insects, and usually, a backup hearth where wood smolders slowly, capable of smoking for hours. Krog knows exactly how each fire should look, smell, and sound. By the color of the flame, he can determine whether to add fuel, air, or if other types of wood are needed. This is an engineering level of skill applied to fire management. He adds specific types of wood to each hearth. Hardwood for long-lasting heat, softwood for a quick flame, aromatic wood for a pleasant scent, different wood for different needs. And all of this is based on knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Then he checks the weather, but not through an app. He goes outside and reads the environment like a book. The direction and strength of the wind, the shape and color of the clouds, the smell and feel of the air, the behavior of animals, the movement of plants, sound patterns. He processes dozens of environmental variables to predict not only today's weather, but also the conditions for the next few days. This information will determine his entire day. What activities are possible? Where might the group need to move? What food sources will be available? Is there a need to prepare for a storm? Modern meteorologists, with all their technology, are accurate about 65% of the time for 5-day forecasts. Krog and his people, using only observation and experience, were likely more accurate. While he's outside, he also checks for security, looking for tracks of large predators, signs that other groups of people have been in the area, tracks of animals that can be hunted, changes in local water sources. This isn't paranoia, it is survival intelligence. Krog needs to know about any threats or opportunities within a radius of several miles around the camp. His family's life depends on this information. By the time he returns inside, other family members are beginning to wake up. But there is no rush, no frantic hurry to get ready for work. The daily routine flows naturally, based on environmental conditions and the needs of the group. His wife, let's call her Nia, is an expert in her field. She knows more about identifying plants, cooking, processing hides, and creating textiles than most modern people know about anything at all. She is already checking the food supplies and planning meals based on what is available, and what today's tasks will require. This isn't just grabbing a bite to eat. It is nutritional planning that considers energy expenditure, available ingredients, preparation time, and storage needs. Their breakfast is likely better balanced than what most modern people eat. meat from wild animals for protein, nuts and seeds for healthy fats, berries and other fruits for vitamins and quick energy, root crops for complex carbohydrates. Everything is fresh, organic, and locally sourced. They also drink herbal teas made from plants with specific healing properties, some for energy, some for digestion, some to support the immune system. Nia knows dozens of different medicinal plants and uses them for prevention. The children, by the way, don't just sit and wait to be fed. The 8-year-old is already helping with the fire. The 12-year-old is checking and tidying up the tools. Child labor, lack of education. These children are mastering survival skills by participating in real activities, with real consequences. They aren't memorizing abstract information they will never use. They are developing practical expertise that is directly linked to their future success and survival. By age 10, these children know how to start a fire, identify edible plants, track animals, create simple tools, and navigate by natural science. They have more practical skills than most modern college graduates. After breakfast, the family discusses plans for the day. It isn't the father making a unilateral decision. It is a group consultation where everyone's experience and observations are considered. Krog might have noticed animal tracks promising a successful hunt. Nia might have found plant foods ready for gathering. The children might have noticed changes in the weather or interesting geological features. Decisions are made based on all available information. Where to go, what to do, how to distribute tasks, what tools and equipment to take. Today they have decided to move camp not because trouble has struck, but because local resources are depleted, and seasonal changes point to better opportunities elsewhere. This decision requires incredible coordination and planning. All possessions must be packed efficiently. The route must be planned considering the terrain, weather, water sources, and potential hazards. New camping sites must be scouted and evaluated. Modern families get stressed over moving to the other side of the city. These people regularly moved their entire lives across landscapes full of deadly predators and hostile environments. But from the outside, it seems easy because they have optimized every aspect of the process. Their belongings are created for portability, light but durable tools, multifunctional items, folding shelters that pack compactly. Everything has been carefully selected for maximum utility with minimum weight. Nia can pack the entire household in about an hour. Not because they have few things, but because everything has its place and there is a systematic packing order. Route planning is equally complex. Krog knows the terrain for hundreds of miles in any direction. Water sources, seasonal food availability, safe places to stay overnight, dangerous zones to avoid. He carries a map in his head more detailed than any GPS can provide. They also have several backup plans. If the main route is blocked by weather or predators, they have alternative paths. If the intended site proves unsuitable, they have backup locations. This level of planning and contingency accounting rivals what modern expedition leaders do, with entire teams of specialists and high-tech equipment. The packing itself is like a perfectly choreographed dance. Everyone knows their role. Everything happens in the correct sequence. There are no wasted movements or duplication of effort. Krog and the older boy dismantle the main structure of the shelter. Nia and the younger child pack household items. Everyone has their responsibilities, and they work together with an efficiency that would impress modern logistics experts. But they don't just move at random. They follow seasonal migration paths that their people have used for thousands of years. These routes bring them to the best hunting grounds, exactly when the most game is there, to plant foods when they are perfectly ripe, to water sources that are most reliable in different seasons. These migration paths are cultural technologies just as much as the tools they carry with them. This is knowledge accumulated over generations about the optimal use of resources across vast territories during annual cycles. The journey itself is another masterclass in environmental knowledge and group coordination. Krog leads the way, but he is constantly communicating with the others. Hand signals indicate a change in direction. Vocal clicks warn of obstacles or interesting finds. Gestures suggest places to rest or alternative paths. Everyone contributes their observations and experience. Near notices edible plants along the way and marks their location for possible future use. The children find animal tracks and practice their tracking skills. They aren't just traveling, they are constantly gathering information, updating their mental maps, and expanding their knowledge of the territory. When they stop for lunch, it isn't just a food break. It is a strategic pause serving several purposes. The site is chosen for specific advantages: a good view for safety, access to water, protection from the wind, proximity to useful resources. During the meal, they process all the information gathered during the morning trek, discuss what they saw, adjust plans based on new data, and make decisions about the route for the second half of the day. Children are taught through direct experience and expert commentary. They learn to read the landscape, interpret animal behavior, identify useful plants, and think strategically about movement and resource management. After lunch, they continue toward their intended goal but remain flexible. If they discover better opportunities or unexpected obstacles, they adjust their plans accordingly. This adaptability is one of the keys to their success. They have clear plans, but they do not follow them blindly. They react intelligently to changing conditions. By the end of the day, they reach their goal, a place Krog scouted during a previous journey. Here is everything they need: fresh water, natural shelter, good opportunities for hunting and gathering, a protected position, and a beautiful view. Setting up the new camp is another example of skill and efficiency. The shelter is erected quickly because they have done it hundreds of times. Everyone knows the process. The structure is designed for quick assembly and maximum stability. But they don't just set up a tent, they create a home. The interior layout is carefully thought out. Work zones are positioned to provide optimal lighting and ventilation. Sleeping places are arranged for warmth and privacy. Storage zones allow food and tools to be kept in order and at hand. They also set up the hearth system, organize tool storage, establish water collection points, and create waste zones. In a few hours, they create a fully functional living environment. By evening, they settle into their new home. And this is where the truly interesting part of a caveman's life begins. This was the time when they had hours left for activities not directly related to survival. Art, music, storytelling, games, social connections. Krog spends time working on a new spearhead, not because he needs it immediately, but because he enjoys the craft and wants to perfect his technique. This is as much an art form as it is the creation of a tool. Nia works on a textile project, weaving plant fibers into a bag, using patterns that are both functional and beautiful. Again, this is creative self-expression combined with practical skill. The children play games that are also forms of training. Tracking games that improve observation skills, throwing games that develop hand-eye coordination, strategic games that develop planning and problem-solving abilities. But the evening is not just about individual activities. It is also a time for community. In caveman culture, storytelling is of immense importance. Stories that transmit technical knowledge, stories that preserve historical information, stories that teach moral lessons, stories that simply entertain. These tales are the internet, the library, and the entertainment system all rolled into one. This is exactly how knowledge is preserved and passed down through generations. Music is no less important. Instrumental music using those complex flutes we talked about earlier. Vocal music that strengthens bonds and coordination within the group. Rhythmic music accompanying work and ceremonies. Dancing is also common, not just for fun, but as a form of physical exercise, artistic expression, and social cohesion. These are not primitive people who sit around and grunt. These are advanced people engaged in complex cultural activities requiring a high level of skill and creativity. As the evening comes to a close, the family gradually prepares for sleep. But this isn't just putting on pajamas and brushing teeth. They conduct a security check, ensure the fires are properly laid to burn throughout the night. verify that tools and weapons are close at hand, and discuss plans and responsibilities for the next day. Sleeping areas are optimized for warmth, comfort, and safety. Family members arrange themselves to effectively share body heat. Parents lie down in a way that protects the children. Everyone sleeps lightly enough to react quickly to any noise. When they finally fall asleep, it is a deep, restorative sleep that comes after physical activity, natural circadian rhythms, and secure social bonds. And in the morning, the whole cycle begins again, adjusted for weather, season, local conditions, and the needs of the group. What strikes me most about this daily routine is how integrated everything is. Work, education, entertainment, and social interaction happen simultaneously. There is no artificial separation between different aspects of life. These people were not struggling to survive. They lived rich, complex, sophisticated lives in which practical necessity was combined with creative expression and social fulfillment. They had challenges we cannot imagine, but they also had freedoms and pleasures that we have largely lost. They worked as much as was necessary, but no more than that. They had strong family and community bonds. They lived in direct connection with the natural world. They had clear goals and meaningful roles in society. Most importantly, they possessed managerial expertise in skills that directly contributed to their well-being and survival. This is what a day in the life of an ordinary caveman actually looked like. Not a primitive struggle, but a complex life where survival was balanced with quality of life in ways that modern society is still trying to comprehend. But let's be honest, life did not consist only of mammoth tusk fruits and perfectly coordinated moves. These people faced challenges that would absolutely destroy modern civilization. And I'm not talking about the lack of coffee or the Wi-Fi going down. I'm talking about existential threats capable of wiping entire groups off the face of the earth in a matter of days. Remember, this was a world where everything wanted to kill you. The landscape teemed with predators compared to which modern dangerous animals look like household pets. Cave bears weighing 350 kilograms, capable of biting through bones. Saber-toothed cats with 18-centimeter fangs designed for slicing through thick hides. Dire wolves that hunted in packs of 30 or more. But the apex predator was the cave lion. These aren't African lions that accidentally wandered into a cave. This was a completely different species, larger, stronger, and specifically adapted for hunting humans. Archaeological evidence shows that cave lions actively hunted ancient humans not just occasionally, but systematically. They studied human behavioral patterns. They followed migration routes. They developed hunting strategies specifically designed to eliminate human groups. Imagine trying to sleep knowing that somewhere in the darkness, a 200-kilogram killing machine is tracking your scent and planning the best way to attack your family. And that was just one threat out of dozens. The environment itself was constantly trying to kill them. We are talking about the Ice Age, and this is not the cute cartoon version. This is the reality. Temperatures dropping to -50 degrees, blizzards that lasted 4 weeks, ice sheets that advanced and retreated unpredictably, destroying everything in their path during the worst periods. Most of Europe was uninhabitable. The landscape looked like Antarctica. No plants, no animals, nothing but ice and death. But somehow, humans survived. Not just survived, thrived. How? By developing survival strategies so effective that they preserved our species during several near-extinction events. Take the Lachamp event. About 42,000 years ago, the Earth's magnetic field almost disappeared. Cosmic radiation rained down on the planet. The ozone layer was torn apart. Temperatures plummeted. Most large animals went extinct. Essentially, it was the apocalypse, the type of catastrophe that would end modern civilization in months. But ancient humans made it through. And we know exactly how. They went underground. And they didn't just hide in caves, they created complex underground life support systems. Multi-chamber complexes with sophisticated ventilation, water collection, food storage, and waste disposal. These were not crude holes in the ground. They were engineered survival bunkers capable of supporting large groups of people for months, or even years. Prehistoric cave in France contains evidence of one such survival complex. 176,000 years ago, Neanderthals built complex structures deep underground, using carefully arranged stalagmites. We are talking about architecture 140,000 years before the appearance of the first buildings we know of. But surviving environmental disasters was only the beginning of their trials. They also had to face competition for resources. When food was scarce, different human groups came into conflict over hunting territories, water sources, and tool materials. These were not polite disagreements resolved through negotiation. These were life and death conflicts where defeat meant starvation, or the total destruction of the entire group. Archaeological finds point unequivocally to prehistoric wars. Mass graves of victims of violent attacks, defensive fortifications around settlements, weapons specifically created for fighting other humans rather than animals. But here is what's amazing. Most of the time, they found ways to avoid conflicts, using complex diplomatic strategies. Trade networks served as prototypes for peace treaties. If two groups traded with each other, they fought less often. Marriage exchanges created kinship ties between groups, which reduced hostility. Shared religious or cultural practices formed alliances that could last for generations. They developed conflict resolution systems that were more effective than many modern diplomatic efforts. But when diplomacy failed, they were absolutely ruthless. Offnet Cave in Germany contains evidence of what seems to be a massacre that occurred about 6,500 years ago. 34 heads, mostly of women and children, carefully laid out in what looks like a ritual execution. Someone sent a very clear message about what happens to groups that cross certain boundaries. These people understood that sometimes violence is necessary for survival, and when they fought with the same intelligence and planning they applied to everything else. But war was not their main killer. Disease was. Without modern medicine, a simple infection could wipe entire communities off the face of the earth. A broken bone that didn't set correctly could mean death. Childbirth was incredibly dangerous for both mothers and children. And yet, they managed to develop treatment methods that worked well enough to maintain population stability and growth. They discovered plant medicines that we still use today. Willow bark for pain relief, the predecessor of modern aspirin. Echinacea for immune system support. Foxglove digitalis for heart problems. Hundreds of effective treatments resulting from careful observation and experimentation. But their real medical breakthrough was surgery. Archaeologists have found 5,000-year-old skulls with traces of successful brain surgery trepanations, drilling holes in the skull to relieve pressure or treat head injuries, and the bone shows signs of healing, which means the patients survived these procedures. They successfully performed brain surgeries with stone tools. They also developed complex methods for treating injuries, setting fractures, stitching wounds, and even performing amputations when necessary. Skeletons bear evidence that people survived injuries that would have killed a person without immediate modern medical intervention. But perhaps the most impressive medical achievement was their approach to epidemic diseases. When a plague or other infectious diseases struck a group, they had protocols that would impress modern epidemiologists. Isolation of the sick, quarantine procedures, contact tracing to identify potential carriers, MASS relocation of healthy people away from infected areas. They understood the mechanisms of disease transmission and developed containment strategies that saved countless lives. But diseases, wars, and predators were not even their greatest trial. The biggest threat was hunger. Despite their advanced hunting and gathering skills, food was often scarce. Droughts could wipe out plant foods for years. Climate changes could drive away animal populations. Natural disasters could destroy food supplies. During the most severe famines, groups faced an impossible choice: stay and starve or risk everything by embarking on a dangerous migration into unknown territories. Most chose migration, even if it meant crossing territories controlled by hostile groups or traveling through landscapes teeming with predators. These decisions to migrate required incredible courage and strategic thinking. They had to plan routes through dangerous lands, coordinate the movement of large groups, including children and the elderly, carry enough supplies for journeys that could last months, and navigate using only natural landmarks and celestial observations. And they had to do all this while fighting, fleeing, or avoiding groups that wanted to kill them. Some migrations span thousands of miles and several climate zones. Imagine a trek from Alaska to Mexico with your entire extended family, with all your possessions, without maps, without supply lines, while hostile groups try to stop you at every major river crossing. These were exactly the kinds of journeys ancient humans made regularly when survival demanded it. But the most terrifying trial they faced was the volcanic winter. About 74,000 years ago, the Toba volcano in Indonesia erupted with the force of multiple nuclear warheads. Clouds of ash encircled the globe. Temperatures worldwide plummeted. Vegetation died. Animal populations plummeted. This event nearly brought an end to human civilization. Genetic analysis shows that the entire population of Earth shrank, possibly to as few as 10,000 people worldwide. We were closer to extinction than at any other moment in human history. But even here, they somehow held on. How? By developing survival strategies so extreme, they seem almost impossible. Some groups survived by following retreating ice sheets, hunting the few animals that could survive in Arctic conditions. Others migrated to coastal areas and lived primarily off shellfish and seaweed. Some went underground and lived for generations like human moles. They ate things a modern person would not consider edible. Tree bark, insect larvae, grass seeds, anything that contained calories. They developed preservation methods that allowed them to keep food edible for years. Smoking, drying, fermentation, and underground storage. Through sheer ingenuity, they turned the meager resources of the environment into the means of survival. But what is most impressive is that they maintain their cultural traditions. Even during these survival crises, archaeological data shows that even during the worst famines and catastrophes, they continued to create art. They continued to perform burial rites. They continued to teach children traditional skills and knowledge. They understood that the loss of culture is simply another form of death. Therefore, they protected their traditions as fiercely as their lives. This is the difference between humans and any other species. When other animals face existential threats, they focus exclusively on biological survival. When humans face existential threats, they fight to preserve not only their lives, but also their way of life. Even when they were forced to eat tree bark and hide in caves, they remained human, still creating, teaching, and maintaining the cultural traditions that defined who they were. But survival came at a high price. Physical evidence shows that life was a severe trial for their bodies. Skeletons reveal injuries that never fully healed, arthritis from constant physical exertion, worn teeth from eating coarse food, signs of malnutrition during lean periods. The psychological stress must have been incredible as well. Constant vigilance against predators, the regular loss of family members to disease, accidents, or violence, the weight of responsibility for life and death decisions affecting entire groups. Modern humans develop PTSD from far less traumatic experiences. For these people, trauma was a daily reality, and yet, they somehow maintained stable family structures and social bonds. They raised children who became successful adults. They created communities that existed for thousands of years. How did they cope with the psychological pressure? Through systems of community support that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. Shared storytelling helped process traumatic experiences. Ritual actions gave meaning and purpose during difficult times. Close family ties provided emotional security. Regular festivities strengthened group identity and morale. They also had spiritual practices that helped them cope with uncertainty and loss. Not organized religion as we understand it, but belief systems that provided comfort and guidance during crisis. Archaeological finds suggest they believed in an afterlife, the spiritual protection of ancestors, and a meaningful connection between humans and the natural world. These beliefs provided psychological resources that helped them endure suffering and loss. But perhaps most importantly, they had a sense of purpose that modern people often lack. Each person had a clear, vital role in the group's survival. Every skill developed had a direct bearing on their well-being, and the well-being of those close to them. Every day brought a challenge that required all their intelligence and creative potential. They did not suffer from meaninglessness or a lack of purpose. They struggled with real challenges that required real solutions, and they won against impossible odds. They didn't just survive, they became stronger, smarter, and more sophisticated. But their greatest trial was still ahead. About 40,000 years ago, the climate became even more unstable. Ice sheets rapidly advanced and retreated. Sea levels rose and fell sharply. Entire ecosystems appeared and disappeared within a single generation. This period of extreme ecological chaos was to determine whether man was just another species that got lucky for a while, or if he had truly become something new. The next few thousand years were to test the strength of every survival strategy they had developed, every innovation created, and every social bond built. Some groups would not make it. Entire populations of people disappeared during this period, leaving behind only archaeological traces of their existence. But others would not just survive. They would use this period of crisis to create the most complex technologies, art forms, and social systems in human history. They would emerge from this crucible as fully modern humans, ready to inhabit the entire planet and eventually build civilizations that would dominate the Earth. But first, they had to endure the ultimate test. And the way they did it showed just how extraordinary these people actually were. They passed the test, not just by the skin of their teeth, not just barely making ends meet, they succeeded absolutely brilliantly. The period from 40,000 to 10,000 years ago, which archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic, became the time when humans became unstoppable, when they moved from survival to dominance, when they transformed from just another species competing for resources into the most successful life form in Earth's history. And they did it in the worst environmental conditions our planet had seen in millions of years. While ice sheets chaotically advanced and retreated, while sea levels rose and fell by hundreds of feet, while entire continents became uninhabitable, humans were experiencing their greatest period of innovation and expansion. It was as if the crisis became fuel for their creativity. During this period, they invented art as we know it. Not only cave painting, but also sculpture, jewelry, decorative objects, and portable art that traveled with nomadic groups. The Lascaux caves in France, the Venus figurines found all over Europe, the most complex bone carvings that required hundreds of hours of painstaking work. But this was not art for art's sake. It was a communication revolution. These artistic traditions created shared cultural languages capable of uniting groups over vast distances. A person from the lands of modern-day Germany could travel to Spain and immediately recognize familiar artistic symbols and cultural practices. Art became the first global communication system. In this same period, they perfected their musical traditions, not only those bone flutes we spoke of earlier, but entire orchestras of prehistoric instruments. Drums, whistles, rattles, stringed instruments made of sinew and wood. Recent analysis of cave acoustics shows that they chose specific locations for musical performances. Based on their sound properties, they were creating concert halls 30,000 years before anyone built the first building, specifically for concerts. But the most incredible innovation was their social technology. Faced with unprecedented ecological challenges, they developed systems of cooperation that allowed hundreds of people to work together toward common goals. Trade networks spanning continents, information exchange systems that spread innovations across thousands of miles within decades. They created the first global civilization, and they did it without writing, without official governments, without any of the organizational tools we consider necessary for large-scale cooperation. How? Through shared cultural practices that created trust and cooperation between groups. that had never met before. If you could make the same spearhead, create the same artistic symbols, and perform the same ritual actions as someone else, it was likely safe to trade with them, or perhaps even camp together, exchange marriage partners, and form lasting alliances. Culture became the technology for scaling cooperation beyond personal relationships. It was then that humans developed what researchers call cumulative culture, the ability to build upon previous innovations instead of constantly starting over from scratch. Each generation could improve upon what came before it, leading to exponential progress in tools, techniques, and knowledge. And this worked so well that humans began to inhabit the entire planet. During the Upper Paleolithic, humans reached Australia by building boats and sailing across 60 miles of open ocean. They colonized the Arctic by developing cold weather technologies that allowed them to survive in temperatures that would kill most mammals. They crossed the Bering Land Bridge and spread throughout the Americas in less than 2,000 years, from Alaska to the southern tip of South America, adapting to every environment they encountered along the way. Rainforests, deserts, mountains, coasts, steppes, tundra. Every ecosystem on Earth became a home for human communities. But they did not just disperse chaotically. They intelligently adapted to each new environment, developing specialized technologies and cultures optimized for local conditions. Arctic peoples developed sophisticated ice fishing methods, ways to build snow shelters, and cold weather clothing that remained unsurpassed until the advent of modern synthetic materials. Desert peoples developed water conservation and navigation methods that allowed them to thrive in conditions where most animals could not survive. Coastal peoples developed advanced shipbuilding, deep-sea fishing, and marine resource management that sustained large populations for thousands of years. Mountain peoples developed high-altitude survival methods, specialized hunting gear, and a system for managing vertical ecosystems. Each environment gave rise to unique innovations that eventually spread through trade networks to benefit people everywhere. And throughout all this expansion and innovation, they maintain their core human qualities: art, music, storytelling, spiritual practices, family bonds, and communal cooperation. They did not lose their humanity in the pursuit of survival. They preserved and enriched it. By the time the Ice Age finally ended 10,000 years ago, and agriculture began, humans had become something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. They had become a species that could survive anywhere, adapt to anything, and improve their conditions through intelligence and cooperation. Rather than mere genetic evolution, they developed technologies for every aspect of human life, tools for every conceivable task, social systems for every type of challenge, and cultural practices that provided meaning, purpose, and psychological resilience. They became masters of survival. But what truly strikes me is that, when the Ice Age ended and conditions became easier, they did not settle down or relax. They used their accumulated knowledge and skills to create something entirely new: agriculture, permanent settlements, specialized crafts, complex societies, and, in time, cities, writing, and formal governments. The foundation of everything we call civilization was laid by people who learned to thrive in the harshest environmental conditions in human history. Every subsequent innovation, from agriculture to the internet, was built on the knowledge and skills developed by our Paleolithic ancestors. The ability to plan long-term projects, the potential for complex cooperation, the skills of tool-making and problem-solving, the social bonds that make large-scale societies possible, the creative impulses that drive art, music, and scientific discovery. All of this came from those primitive cavemen. But what does this mean for us today? First, it means we are capable of much more than we think. The same brain that survived ice ages and volcanic winters is the brain we carry within us today. The same capacity for innovation, cooperation, and resilience that helped our ancestors through impossible trials is still available to us. When we look at modern problems, climate change, resource depletion, social conflict, we are not facing anything more complex than what our ancestors routinely overcame. They survived global environmental catastrophes with stone tools and animal skin clothing. We have technologies they could not have imagined. If they could find solutions to existential threats, we can certainly handle what we are facing now. Second, it means we have lost touch with some fundamental human capabilities that may be worth restoring. The ability to read the natural environment and predict the weather, the skills to make tools and useful objects with our own hands, the capacity for deep cooperation and mutual support, the practice of integrating work, family, art, and community into a cohesive way of life. These are not primitive relics of the past, they are advanced human capabilities that contributed to 300,000 years of successful survival and development. Modern life has given us incredible advantages, but it has also disconnected us from some key human strengths that may be worth rediscovering. Third, it means we come from an absolutely incredible lineage. Your ancestors were not just lucky survivors, they were innovative geniuses who overcame impossible odds time and again through intelligence, creativity, and cooperation. You carry within you the genes that survived ice ages, volcanic winters, predator attacks, and events bordering on extinction. You inherited cognitive abilities that were tested and honed by hundreds of thousands of years of solving life and death problems. You are not just a descendant of survivors, you are a descendant of champions. But perhaps most importantly, the story of our Paleolithic ancestors reminds us of what humans are capable of when we truly need to prove ourselves. Faced with existential threats, they did not panic or give up. They approached the matter creatively. They collaborated. They innovated. They adapted. When resources were scarce, they found new sources or developed ways to use resources more efficiently. When conditions became hostile, they developed technologies for survival or migrated to better places. When social conflicts arose, they created diplomatic solutions or defended themselves effectively. They met every challenge with intelligence, determination, and mutual support. And they didn't just survive, they thrived. They created art, music, and cultural traditions that brought joy and meaning to their lives even in the most difficult periods. They understood that preserving their humanity was just as important as preserving their lives. This is the true legacy of our caveman ancestors, not primitive survival, but a sophisticated human life in complex conditions. They proved that humans can adapt to anything, survive everything, and maintain their essence through any crisis. They showed us what we are capable of when necessary. So the next time you face a problem that seems impossible, remember where you came from. Remember that your ancestors survived things that would have ended modern civilization. Remember that you carry in your genes and your brain the wisdom accumulated over 300,000 years of solving human problems. Remember that every challenge you face has been faced before by people with far fewer resources, who not only survived but found ways to thrive. And remember that being human is not about having an easy life. It is about rising to meet whatever challenges life throws at you, armed with intelligence, creativity, cooperation, and determination. That is what it meant to be a caveman, and that is what it means to be human today. The only difference is that now we know our story. We know what we are capable of. We know that we descend from the greatest masters of survival in the history of life on Earth. And we know that whatever difficulties we may face in the future, we have everything we need to overcome them. Because we are not just modern people, we are the descendants of cavemen.